fanatics. Glad you could join us for another off-season edition of Gridiron Gab Pro Style, where we gab about all things pro football, from the scoops of the regular season to the scores of the postseason and the picks in the off-season. Let's start gabbing.
The autumn winds move like the thunderous waves of Neptune's sacred palace. And here, amongst the blackened soil, lies the ragged hands, worn, torn, and callous. They await with cunning and vicious prowess, for the warriors have returned.
Come on, Dirt! Don't do it! Woo! No way! Woo! 85! Crying out loud! You're making me, you're driving me nuts!
But behold,
Welcome back, you guys. Thank you once again for joining us here. Today we continue our off-season look at the Las Vegas Raiders. The 8-9 Las Vegas Raiders, I should say. A team that looked as though they were on the verge of getting things together right there at the end of the season, but then they had 3 losses that really just destroyed their playoff opportunities. And looking at the Raiders, this was a football team that really had a chaotic season between the ups and downs of the Josh Jacobs saga and the ups and downs with Davonte Adams. This is a team that I don't even want to say that their expectations were high, but in a sense they were. They started off 3-1. Then they hit a really nasty spell where they were shut out by the Minnesota Vikings 3-0. And ultimately, it just wasn't pretty the rest of the season. They finished strong. They had a middle of the road push where they won 4-6, and then they finished the season losing 3 of 4. And it just did not materialize offensively. They're currently led by star wide receiver Davonte Adams and star pass rusher Max Crosby. But looking at what this team was not able to do, I would venture to say that a lot of their issues weren't necessarily on the defensive side of the ball, even though you could argue there were a couple of games where it looked like there was no defense. But looking at what the Raiders were capable of doing, you look at last year's stats, and a lot of what you could look and point your finger at would be the quarterback position. And honestly, I can tell you that I believe that the Raiders' issues were at the quarterback position. I think everybody can agree to that. When you look at Josh Jacobs, who played 13 of the 17 games, he had 805 yards rushing. And then you see Zamir White, who played in every game. He had 451 yards on the ground. So running the football was not a real issue for the Raiders, although you could argue that considering how ineffective throwing the football the Raiders were, they still were pretty good at running the football. And you look at Davonte Adams' numbers: 103 grabs, 1,144 yards, and 8 touchdown grabs. Still doing what he's doing at a high level with even the lack of production from the quarterback. And then you include Jacoby Myers, who had 71 grabs, whom this is a team that has some really good weapons on it. And you include Michael Mayer, who had 27 grabs in his rookie campaign. But if you're looking at the Raiders and you're wondering what they can do to go forward, there's quite a few things they could do. They did make a good push at Gardner Minshew. Now, to me, this is kind of a question mark as to what you want to do with this guy. Aiden O'Connell, in many instances, has been named the starter in a lot of podcasts and content creators. With the signing of Gardner Minshew, with the signing of Gardner Minshew, many people are slating him to be the backup. Now, granted, O'Connell has had the ball in his hands for the most part of what we're seeing here. You know, he played in 11 games, and a lot of people are speculating that this will be the starter for next season. I'm of the attitude that if Aiden O'Connell comes in and struggles, and I know a lot of people are going to say, well, yeah, duh, Gardner Minshew's the guy. But I think and this is just me, I would make this guy have to win the job in camp. He wouldn't just be handed the job. I get it. He was a rookie last year. But you have too many weapons here with the Raiders that you have to find a way to get these guys involved. Or you're going to have to figure out a way to move on from Davonte Adams. That's just the only thing. And I would even venture to say you may have to move off of him early. But looking at the games that the Raiders did not win last year, I mean, that 3-0 Vikings defeat was just really telling. As I said, the defense for the Raiders was very good in a sense that they had one Max Crosby who was pretty daggum stout at 14.5 sacks. Then you had Malcolm Kuntz who had 8 sacks. But then you turn and you look at what I call, as always, the telltale sign. Many of you guys watch my show, you know that is what I look at. And you look at the turnover margin, and the Raiders were -2. Which, if you guys translate that, 9 times out of 10, if you're going to be a 500 team or above, you need that plus minus to be at the top. You need to be over the 0 mark. And the Raiders, of course, were not. They were -2. And their defense they were not getting a ton of turnovers. They got 22 takeaways, but they were giving away the ball at 24, and they had 18 interceptions. So, and that's usually custom for when you have a brand new quarterback. That's usually custom. It's not the norm, but I mean, it's above the norm. But most of the time when you have a young quarterback, there's going to be a lot of mistakes made that the defenses have to make up for. And unfortunately for the Raiders defense, they weren't able to make up that difference enough. But looking at your secondary of the Raiders, you have Trayvon Moehrig, who's been a pretty good player considering after he was drafted out of TCU in 2021. He had 3. He led the team in interceptions, as well as Robert Spillane, linebacker Robert Spillane. Amik Robertson had 2 interceptions. But the issue with the Raiders is they only have $20 million in cap space, and there's going to be a lot of questions as to whether or not they can fill some of these holes that they're going to have. Now, they didn't lose necessarily a whole bunch of players, but they did lose, of course, Josh Jacobs. And they did, of course, lose Amik Robertson. And the big issue that you got to deal with is whether or not you can replace Josh Jacobs. And, you know, considering that you had a running back in Zamir White who finished strong in the absence of Josh Jacobs, that does give you a cause for relief if you're a Raiders fan. But you still have to solve this issue that you have at the quarterback position. Now, do I think Aiden O'Connell is the guy? Now, a lot of people are saying that you know, Mr. CeeLo, why are you giving him such a hard time? He's a rookie. Well, it's not necessarily I'm giving him a hard time. I'm just looking at the completion percentage was good, but then you look at the 12 touchdowns and the 7 interceptions. Now, it wasn't as bad as Jimmy Garoppolo's 7 TDs and 9 interceptions. I get that. But you look for a guy who is just stepping into this. He made a lot of short throws. Now, I think Michael Mayer being back, you know, that being his rookie campaign, he's going to help out immensely. He's going to be a guy that is going to be able to bolster this offense and put it in a lot of different ways and make this offense so much more efficiently. And I think if they use this guy in a more of a safety valve type way, he can make a lot of plays and also put him into a lot of red zone areas. or a lot of red zone opportunities to make throws. And I think if with probably a summer, it would work. But in case, that's why you sign a guy like Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is going to be a guy that he's a journeyman, but he's always, in my opinion, been a good backup, borderline starter. He's always a guy that is been able to, you've been able to plug him in, and he's always been able to get you to a point where if your defense is playing well, he can keep you in the game long enough to finish it. Now, you know, he has had some issues with late game turnovers, but maybe, just maybe, with guys like Davonte Adams and Michael Mayer, he'll be able to make this work. But looking at what the Raiders were able to gain so far in free agency, being Alexander Mattison, who was a really good change-up running back at Minnesota, and he was placed in the starting role last year, and it just did not work in Minnesota's favor or his favor. But I think ultimately this is going to be a huge addition to the Raiders' offensive backfield, giving Zamir White the nod for the starting position and putting Madison back in his natural third down role set. But probably, to me, the big signing of this, one of the biggest signings, I talked about this in several of my other shows, you guys, Christian Wilkins. To me, this was just one of the big signings that the Raiders were able to, pick up. I mean, they signed him to I think it was a $100 million deal. And I knew going into this, Wilkins was going to be a guy that this was going to be a guy that I knew was going to be was going to get a huge payday. The question is, who was going to ante up? And the Raiders did. And this is going to be huge, going with Tyree Wilson, the guy that the Raiders drafted with their first pick last year. And they expect big things out of his pass rushing ability to go along with Max Crosby. If they can get this together, Raiders, if you guys can get this together on defense and get that turnover margin up over the plus, and I would say even in that large 10 to 11, you could go from an 8-9 football team to possibly a 12-5 team just with the turnovers. And if you can get Aiden O'Connell and company just to sell on the idea of just managing the game, not making mistakes, you could go a long way. So Raiders may be right there in the middle of the pack, but they could very well change this narrative with just this signing of Christian Wilkins. This guy is a huge wrecking ball of a guy in the middle of a defense. He eats up plays, eats up a lot of blockers, and this is going to help the Raiders linebacking core make plays that they were not able to make last year in the running game. And you look at Harrison Bryant, who was also signed, tight end Harrison Bryant, and this may not look like a big signing on the surface, but if the Raiders are going to play this type of defense, they're probably going to go 1-2 tight ends deep. Harrison Bryant is a pretty good receiving tight end. And you could definitely go with 2 tight end sets now with this kind of another threat down the field in Harrison Bryant. Now, he doesn't strike you as a major signing, but he is, especially going with Michael Mayer. Now, the one thing that jumped out at me when I was looking at what the Raiders need to do in the offseason, they already did it. They addressed one issue, and that was defensive tackle. The question that keeps coming up is, are the Raiders going to go after a quarterback? Or are they going to go after a lineman? Now, listening to a lot of individuals, what people are saying is, now that we've signed Christian Wilkins, we need to do one or two things. We either need to go after a lineman or we need to go after a quarterback. Now, I'm a believer that if the Raiders stick with where they're at, you could very well get Troy Fontenot right where you're at. Now, here's the thing. Fontenot is a great athlete that has the ability to play guard and center. And it would be a major plus if they were running a zone blocking scheme, which we're not sure what the Raiders are going to do. But it would seem if the Raiders are going to beef up on the defense and put a lot of pressure on teams from the front four, it would be feasible that you could get a guy that is capable of pulling and being athletic on the offensive line, creating holes for Zamir White, who is a physical running back in itself. But then again, a guy whom you guys know from listening to the show, another guy that I truly love, and especially with his 40 time, barring that this hip injury is not going to hinder him, is going to be Nate Wilkins, the 6'2", 185 corner out of Clemson. You know, you're going to have to replace Amik Robertson. Yeah, that's a given. You got to replace this guy. And not saying the defensive backs for the Raiders are not good, but you got Nate Hobbs and you got Jack Jones at the two starting corners, and your safeties look like they're in good. You've got a good core safeties. That doesn't seem to be your issue. Now, however, you do need to get in situations where you're able to stop the run and get on third and long, so you can have a better opportunity of getting off the field. Now, if I'm the Raiders, yes, you do want to get another offensive lineman that can do the things that Fontenot can do. But, however, if it were me, and you guys hear me say this a lot, the Raiders are 2 players away from being ultra competitive, in my opinion. So I would try to trade down, because there's a lot of good linemen in this year's draft. If I could possibly move right around that 23rd pick and take someone like Amarius Mims out of Georgia. He's not polished, but he brings, you hear this all the time, the sky high potential, because he's 6'7", 340. But the thing is, he'll take some time, and he could end up being, with the 6'7", 340, he can end up being a tackle. Maybe not left tackle, but maybe right with that size. But hopefully you can get this guy to the next level. And this is why I'm okay with drafting him. And then possibly getting a second first-round pick or a high second round, you could possibly take. Because you got a lot of choices. You got Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. And you could take him. And then you've got, of course, Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's 6'1", 195. But I love TJ Tampa. This is why if I'm trading my pick, or I decide to trade my pick from the Raiders, I need that second round pick. Or I could you'll get a low end second pick, trade up and take TJ Tampa. Guys, when you hear me talk about corners, any of these corners that are 6'2", I love them, because they create a less of a throwing window for these quarterbacks, especially when you're talking about go routes and outs. You have to put that thing on on target with these 6'2" long-limbed defensive backs. And Tampa is so fluid, and if he can just clean up the footwork, which is a big ask, cleaning up the footwork is a big ask for a cornerback, because the footwork and the hip fluidity is very tough to make up for playing cornerback. But he could be a huge impact player at this level. He has the size and the tools to get it done. Now, there's a lot of people that are going to say, well, why don't the Raiders just stay put if they can do that? Well, you can accumulate extra assets, and you can even get to a point where you're able to move even further in the draft, possibly deeper into the second, possibly third round. Because as I've said many times on this offseason edition, there's a lot of depth in this draft. There's a lot of players that are going to be available and can play fast and play very early if they are put in the right system. Then you have a guy by the name of Braden Fisk out of Florida State. He's going to be a guy that is huge that the Raiders could possibly take in the draft. 6'5", 297. He has the ability to play both sides. He reminds me of Chris Jones in a lot of ways. He has that ability. And I would think if the Raiders were serious about trading down and getting it, you could get this guy, arguably, and possibly, if you wanted a quarterback, if you're not sold on Aiden O'Connell, you could even take Michael Penix later on. Now, a lot of people are saying that Penix probably will not be on the board past the first round. That's the rumblings that we're hearing. And there's possibility that Bo Nix could be in the chat here. This could be something that the Raiders are looking at. I mean, or it could be they give Aiden O'Connell another look, but they could bring this guy in, bring that guy in. I would even venture to say you could bring in Jordan Travis with a later pick. A lot of people are going to say, well, he's not quarterback. Well, there's a lot of these guys in this draft that get shot up the board, but just off of their sheer ability. But you can't argue what Jordan Travis has done. He's got a great wide receiver, and he had a great wide receiver in Keon Coleman, and he has Davonte Adams, for crying out loud. I'm not huge on taking a wide receiver by the Raiders, but you could argue putting another big name next to Davonte Adams, especially a big guy, would be immensely huge if they could do that. And I know a lot of people going to say, well, the Raiders don't really need a wide receiver, but you could argue about them. You could argue about them taking one. I mean, there's no set reasoning why they couldn't. I know people are going to say, well, they need a center and they need a tackle. That's fine. You can go that route, but here's the thing. If you can get another wide receiver on the other side, let's say we get late into the second round and you decide you want to get another big guy. Keon Coleman is kind of falling down people's draft board because of his 40 time. But then there's Jalen Polk, 6'2", 204, who played beside the ever aforementioned Rome Odunze, and he was really good as a number 2. And then it would be tremendous for this guy to play beside Davonte Adams because his route tree is kind of limited, but he's one of the best go up and get it guys in this draft. Even considering he's 6'2", he's one of the best contested receivers in the draft, and he just has a knack for making the big plays. That's just the only way to put it. And the Raiders, I would think about it like this: could it be a possibility that they part ways with Davonte Adams? Possibility. You only have $22 million in cap space, and you don't know when one of these Davonte moments are going to come up. And that's just the reality of it. You have to prepare for those moments and go about it accordingly. But looking down at guys, the Raiders they've got 9 picks. Now, they've got 8 picks. I'm sorry. They've got the 13th, of course, the 44th, 77th, 112th, 148th, 208th from Kansas City, 223 from New England, and the 229 from Minnesota. Basically, that translates into 2 7s, a 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. So, looking at this, as I said before, I'm basically of the attitude, if you're not one player away, you need to find a way to get draft capital. And do I think the Raiders need to trade up and take a quarterback? Absolutely not. I think Aiden O'Connell, much like I said with the Washington Commanders, you need to stick with the guy that has shown some strengths of improvement. You don't just move off, because honestly, it would require you to do too much. You made the great move in getting Christian Wilkins, and as I said, I would be one of those guys that is I'll be looking at this and saying, okay, what can we do to improve this defense even more? Now, as I said, that's exactly what I would do. I would either take Troy Fontenot at tackle or Nate Wiggins if I could not move off this pick, and if these two guys are available. And honestly, trade back would be the best option, and being able to take somebody like an Amarius Mims or a Graham Barton. But as I said, I look for the Raiders to possibly, the way things have been shaping up, I look for the Raiders to somehow take a quarterback. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm just giving you what I would do, Mr. CeeLo, as the GM of the Las Vegas Raiders. But let me know what you guys would think. Give me your ideas down in the comments, and also go to my Facebook page of the same name. Comment and check out the other off-season shows that I've already done. Also, go to my Instagram at Mr. CeeLo and check out the other shows that I'm doing and the other things I'm involved in. as well as like and comment in the comments down below. Let me know what you think the Raiders need to do, and I will give you a shout out on the show. But until the next time, you guys, same Gap channel, same Gap platform.
But behold, there is a warm breeze that comes from the west. The blazing sounds of victory fuel their everlasting quest. It is a call to arms, for they are here. An army that has the will to challenge and the will to dare.